GWR No. 111, the Great Bear, occupies a singular place in British railway history, being built at Swindon Works and completed in February 1908 as the Great Western Railway's first and only Pacific, using the 462 wheel arrangement, while also demonstrating the first locomotive of that type to run on a railway in Great Britain. Conceived under the direction of George Jackson Churchward, the GWR's chief mechanical engineer, it was a one-off machine of exceptional size, intended either as a serious experiment in future locomotive development, a prestigious publicity statement, or most likely a combination of both. In appearance, dimensions and ambition, it stood apart from every other GWR engine of its time, though its history was not that of an unquestioned triumph. Instead, the Great Bear became famous because it was bold, unusual, and controversial, a locomotive that attracted admiration, curiosity, and publicity in equal measure, but which never quite justified itself in daily service. By 1907, the GWR was already strongly committed to the 460 wheel arrangement for fast and heavy work, and Churchward had every reason to be satisfied with his successful Saint and Star classes. Those engines were already hauling the railway's principal expresses effectively, so on the surface there was no pressing need for an even larger locomotive. One explanation was that the GWR directors wanted the largest locomotive in Britain, a showpiece that would reinforce the company's prestige at a time when rivalry between major railways was intense and publicity mattered greatly. Another interpretation, argued strongly by O.S. Knock, was that the project originated entirely with Churchward himself and was not imposed on him by outside pressure. In this, the Great Bear was primarily an experiment in boiler design, with Churchward having long believed that the boiler was the key element in locomotive performance, and it was clear that he was concerned with the future growth of traffic and the day when his existing 460s may no longer be sufficient. There is also evidence from a statement made to the GWR board in 1906 when Churchward referred to the earlier GWR designed 442 North Star and indicated that although a 462 would then be larger than required, such a design was being prepared. In January 1907, the GWR board approved £4,400 for construction, later adding a further £860 for associated expenses. The total outlay was substantial, amounting to £5,260 at the time, and later estimates have suggested that this would equate to a roughly £647,000 in modern terms. In design, the Great Bear combined familiar Churchward practice with features that were wholly new to the GWR. The front end was closely related to the Star class, but the locomotive was enlarged and adapted to suit the Pacific wheel arrangement. The most conspicuous reason for adopting 462 was to allow the fitting of a wide firebox over the trailing wheels, and this was central to the whole concept. The firebox surface was 182 square feet, approximately 17.5% larger than that of the Star class, and the grate area was almost 42 square feet, a size that promised abundant steam production, but also demanded much from the firemen. The boiler itself was entirely new, with the Swindon No. 6 design, pressed at £225 per square inch, and with a barrel 23 feet long, a length remarkable not only in 1908, but by later standards as well. Churchward's desire was clearly to obtain a vast steaming capacity from a very large boiler, and in pure scale the engine succeeded. The locomotive also carried a Swindon No. 1 superheater, as built, later replaced by a No. 3 superheater, in an attempt to improve performance. The four simple expansion cylinders, 2 inside and 2 outside, measured 15 inches by 26 inches, and their 15-inch diameter was the largest possible without fouling the rear wheels of the leading bogie. The outside cylinders drove the second coupled axle, while the inside cylinders drove the first, and a Volschart's valve gear was employed, with the driving wheels being 6 foot 8.5 inches in diameter, a size later familiar on other Express Pacifics, but in 1908, associated here with a locomotive that was intended for powerful and comparatively fast work. The leading bogie wheels were 3 foot 2 inches in diameter, and the trailing truck wheels were 3 foot 8 inches. The physical scale of the Great Bear was imposing. The combined locomotive and tender length was about 71 foot 2 inches, and the engine alone weighed around 97 long tons in working order, and the locomotive plus tender together came to roughly 143 tons, or, in one set of contemporary measurements, a total weight of 320,320 pounds. The surface weight of the locomotive was given as 217,840 pounds, with a adhesive weight of 137,424 pounds. The axle load was especially significant, standing at 20 long tons 900 weight, about 20.8 tons or roughly 45,808 pounds per axle in the heaviest case, which was extremely high for the period. Boiler figures further illustrate the engine's scale, with a firebox area of around 158.2 square feet in one reckoning, a tube heating area of 2,676.8 square feet, evaporative heating area of 2,835 square feet, superheater area of 545 square feet, and a total heating surface of approximately 3,380 square feet. Its tractive effort was about 27,800 pounds force, usually quoted as 27,797 or 27,800 pounds force, and its estimated power has been put around 1,700 horsepower. The 8-wheeled bogie tender held around 3,500 imperial gallons of water and carried around 6 long tons of coal, with one source listing fuel capacity as 13,440 pounds. Construction and assembly took place at Swindon Works, where the locomotive emerged in February 1908. Even before the locomotive entered service, however, practical concerns arose, with the civil engineer imposing severe route restrictions because of the heavy axle load, and these restrictions immediately defined the locomotive's career. In theory, it was Britain's first Pacific and the largest of its kind, though in practice it could only run over a very limited portion of the GWR system, with its route availability colour being red, and under the GWR's later power classification system introduced in 1920, it was classified as special, denoted by a black plus sign on the red route availability disc. Curiously, this special status did not arise from an exceptional tractive effort alone, for the 27,800 pound force figure actually lay within the range of Class D, but rather the classification reflected its unusual standing as a unique, very powerful, and very restricted locomotive. The high coupled axle load meant that, for most practical purposes, it was confined to the Paddington to Bristol main line, and although one recorded trip took it as far west as Newton Abbot, such excursions were exceptional, and for the great majority of its life, it was an old oak common engine, based in London, and working mainly on the principal line out of Paddington. When the Great Bear entered service, it was a valuable publicity asset from the outset, and in May 1908, at the Franco-British exhibition at White City in London, the railway displayed models of the locomotive in the machinery hall as the Mammoth engine. The publicity department made much of its size and novelty, and the engine appeared widely in photographs, postcards, and magazines as a symbol of GWR modernity and strength. In August 1908, only 6 months after entering traffic, it was used in a highly publicised demonstration by hauling a 100-wagon goods train from Paddington Goods to Stoke Gifford Yard near Bristol. Its ordinary work, however, was more prosaic and more revealing, with the Great Bear usually working passenger services between Paddington and Bristol, often returning on the Coker or fast vacuum-braked freights from Bristol Temple Meads to Acton. In these duties, the big boiler could show some of the qualities Churchward had hoped for, especially on heavy, fast night freight work, where a large reserve of steam was useful. In that sense, the Great Bear indirectly pointed towards the later need for powerful freight locomotives, such as the 4700 280s, but it never became indispensable in the express passenger sphere, for which its dramatic appearance seemed to mark it out. The Star class continued to perform excellently, and in practical railway terms, the one-off Pacific did not deliver enough extra benefit to justify its drawbacks. One persistent problem was the tendency of the trailing truck axle boxes to overheat, with their proximity to the firebox doing them no favours, and the inside bearing arrangement reduced airflow and made the situation worse. The locomotive was also prone to wheel slip, and at Paddington it became barred from backing into Platform 1 after a number of derailments, and the large 8-wheel bogie tender may have contributed to some of these incidents. The long firebox created further inconveniences, requiring unusually long fire irons, which crews found awkward to handle, with their use affecting cab design, reducing the roof length, and giving enginemen and firemen less weather protection than they would have liked. The locomotive's great size imposed burdens on crews in other ways as well, being large, somewhat awkward, and mechanically distinct from the rest of the fleet, and thus lacking the ease and familiarity of standard Great Western Railway classes, while also being officially limited in service to 65 miles an hour, despite its large driving wheels and express roll. Churchward did not abandon the engine after its early shortcomings became apparent, and in 1913 he attempted to improve its performance by fitting a Swindon No. 3 superheater and top-feed apparatus, while other changes were also made to superheating arrangements and tube dimensions. The basic weaknesses remained, with the enormous boiler barrel and tube length not yielding a proportionate gain in efficiency or sustained performance, while the Star class continued to do the work expected of them with less fuss and greater route flexibility. With the coming of the First World War, further experimental development effectively ceased, with wartime conditions discouraging non-essential innovation, and any prospect of a refined second generation of GWR Pacifics disappeared, and as a result, the Great Bear was passed from being a possible pointer to the future into becoming an increasingly anomalous one-off. For all of this, the locomotive retained prestige within the company for many years, and from its introduction until Churchward's retirement in 1922, it was regarded as the company's flagship engine, despite its technical limitations. Its regular driver was Thomas Blackhall, and over its 16 years as a Pacific, it ran 527,272 miles. The decisive blow to its standing came with the arrival of the Castle class, with 1923 seeing number 4073 Caerphilly Castle appear with a higher tractive effort than the Great Bear, and without the Pacific's route restrictions or awkward maintenance burden. The Castles were effectively enlarged and improved descendants of the Star concept, and they proved that the Great Western Railway could obtain greater power and better all-round usefulness while remaining faithful to the 460 arrangement. Once this had happened, the Great Bear lost not only any technical rationale, but also much of its publicity value, and instead of being the proud giant of the railway, it became an embarrassment, a costly oddity that no longer represented the best of Great Western practice, and with heavy firebox repairs being due, January 1924 would see Churchward's successor, Charles Collett, take the opportunity to remove it from service, with its last day as a Pacific being January 7th of that year. However, the Great Bear did not go to the scrap line in the ordinary way, and instead became the basis, at least nominally, for a Castle-class locomotive, with only the front part of the original frames and the number plates being reused, and that probably little else of consequence survived from the original engine. Nevertheless, in railway accounting and identity, the transformation was treated as a rebuilding, with the locomotive becoming a 460 and would emerge in September 1924 as number 111 Viscount Churchill, named after the company chairman. In this form it was fully absorbed into the standard GWR practice, with the rebuilt locomotive going on to run for another 29 years and covering an additional 1,989,628 miles, an extraordinary contrast with the brief and problematic Pacific life that had preceded it. Withdrawn in July 1953 and scrapped later that same year, it ended its days as a perfectly useful castle rather than as a machine that had once caused such excitement, though the original large 8-wheeled bogie tender also found a further life, being used as a stabilizing tender behind other locomotives, particularly those with reputations for rough riding, and later with 2 other 460 classes. Judgments on the Great Bear have generally been severe, with Cecil J. Allen calling it one of the very few Swindon locomotive types, especially among Churchward's designs, to which the word failure could be properly applied. This verdict has often been repeated, and in strictly operational terms it is hard to dispute, with the locomotive having failed to offer a worthwhile improvement over the existing GWR 460s, suffering from mechanical and practical defects, and was too route restricted to be genuinely useful across the system. Churchward's own feelings about the engine remain open to interpretation, with Le Fleming writing that his dislike of the Bear was well known, while Nock maintained that Churchward had deep affection for it, even if he came to see it as a white elephant rather than a great success. In the end, Great Western's number 111, the Great Bear, remains one of the most fascinating locomotives ever built in Britain, precisely because it was unique, bold and flawed. It was the first British Pacific, the only GWR locomotive of its type, the largest steam locomotive in the country when new, and for a time the object of genuine wonder. It also proved disappointing in service, troublesome in detail, limited in usefulness, and short-lived in original form. Its conversion into Viscount Churchill symbolised the triumph of practical standardisation over experimental grandeur at Swindon, but even so, the Great Bear left a lasting historical legacy, showing what Churchward and the Great Western were prepared to attempt, and revealing the limitations of that mindset, while today, only one of its original nameplates survive in the Science Museum, a fitting relic of a locomotive that was once pioneering, problematic and unforgettable.